Hi, everybody, and welcome to episode 9 of hashtag Blind Talk. And I'm here with my co host. Hello, how are you, TJ?
I'm good. How are you guys?
Doing well, thank you. And we
Good.
have our special guest, Delaney Walsh, today. I've been excited to have Delaney on the podcast with us for a number of weeks. And she has, I think, some really special stories to tell and things that we haven't necessarily covered on our first 8 episodes. So it's always great to get that fresher, younger perspective on blindness and low vision. So we're really excited to have you with us today, Delaney. How are you doing?
I'm good. I'm super excited to be here.
Awesome. Well, I think we usually start in the same place, and that's the diagnosis. But you have a little bit of a different starting point before the diagnosis. Would you like to tell us a little bit about that?
Yes. So the whole blind journey with my family started pretty young. I was in third grade and my brother was in fourth grade. And we noticed he was having some difficulties. And our local eye doctor didn't really know what was going on. So they sent us to Iowa City where we saw some specialists. And then that is when he got diagnosed with Stargardt's disease, a form of macular degeneration. So younger me kind of knew a little bit was going on, kind of not really, going through the motions. And it was really my parents' doing of trying to create the best life for him and give him the most opportunities. So I was with my brother for so many years, and I actually was driving and I would drive him around, and I kind of knew a little bit the ins and outs and his magnifier and the counselors he's worked with and all that stuff. And so then around my junior year of high school, I was driving for about 2 years already, but luckily got into a I got into a car accident and totaled my car, but me and my brother came out perfectly fine. And within the next 2 months, I noticed something was wrong with my vision. So it's a blessing in disguise that that happened and nothing worse happened. But I was really afraid to tell anybody, but I did tell my brother, and I was curious. And this is when I first fully dove into his diagnosis. And I was like, how do you see things? And how did it start out for you? And what was this journey like? And so, learning a little bit more about him, that's when I realized, oh man, I think that's what I'm getting.
So,
And
two questions
yeah.
to start with. I think one thing that I always like to understand is we've talked a lot about this, TJ and I, about our moment. And I was born with blindness, so mine
Mhm.
was from my first memory. But like you, I had a turned eye or a lazy eye, which they did surgery on at the earliest stage before they diagnosed scarring on the corneas of my eyes. But in your case, did your parents do any genetic testing at all with? Once they found out your brother had, or is there a history of Stargardts in your family?
There's no history of Stargardt's at all, and we did not do any genetic testing. But to go a little bit of what you were talking about, I actually did have a lazy eye very early on in my life, and a stubborn little first grader me, I never wanted to wear my eye patch or my glasses, and they decided that that's okay. You don't have to do that. And so my eyes were never a consideration in my younger life.
That's interesting.
Wow.
Also had to wear an eye patch when I had my lazy eye as well. Not a lot of fun for a first
Not at all.
starting out in school. Kids don't really understand the pirate concept at a young age, right? So you get a lot of challenges.
Mhm.
Just listening to your story, Delaney, and re-listening to it again this morning, I just think it's really interesting. And we've talked a lot about working with eye professionals and accurate diagnosis at an early age. Do you think that looking back, do you think that you noticed it at a younger age as your brother was getting diagnosed or before your brother got diagnosed, or did you really not like miss any central vision because of the Stargardts until you were maybe in the car accident or you were diagnosed after that?
I think with my younger years, I presented pretty much with 20/20 vision, there was not really any difficulties. And I really only started noticing again after that car accident, specifically in the classroom when it would be a little bit difficult to focus in on the PowerPoint that's presented.
Yeah. Yeah. So no noticeable things that would have rang the alarm bells to say you've got Stargardt. When you got
Yeah.
diagnosed, tell us a little bit about that conversation after your brother had been diagnosed and you knew a little bit about it and were familiar with it. How did that lead to your diagnosis?
So after speaking with my brother, and I also spoke to a teacher that he kind of worked with a little bit in our high school, I had that conversation with my parents, and we immediately got the phone call to go up to Iowa City to get things checked out. And they did a couple of testing, the visual field testing and all that stuff. And basically they were like, "Yeah, you have it, and we don't know how far it's going to progress. This is just kind of let's see where the journey takes you."
Yeah. And that was about 8 years ago, is that correct?
Oh, let's see. I think so.
Yeah. So, how did you feel when you were diagnosed, like doing the field testing? Because your visual acuity may not change, right, in certain instances at the starting point. So, from
Mhm.
a 20/20 point of view, you may still have pretty good vision in the peripherals. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah. So, TJ has the opposite where she has central vision but no peripheral vision. And so we talk a lot about RP, retinitis pigmentosa, and Stargardt's in same terms because they're both eye conditions that have that loss of both central and peripheral vision. But sometimes the acuity part doesn't change. So people still see well at the beginning points of when they were diagnosed. Has your vision changed in your peripheral much in the last kind of 8 years since diagnosis?
When it first got diagnosed, I did see a lot. It was very much like very minimal change. I could basically, if I needed to drive, I could.
Yeah,
But within probably the span of 3 months, it really progressed very quickly to almost the point I am at now.
yeah,
And within the rest of those 8 years, it's been a very slight decrease. But mostly on my right eye is where I see the best. Funny enough, because my undiagnosed lazy eye on my left eye has gotten much worse. And so I've really only used my right eye to see, and I can see pretty well with that eye. But of course, little details here and there I can easily
yeah.
miss.
Um, so I'm the same. My right eye is much better than my left eye. I have 2200 vision, so I'm just classed as legally blind in my right eye, but my left eye only has 2% vision, so I struggle a lot as well with that. And had cataract surgeries in both eyes as well. But we've had a lot of people on with Stargardt's recently, which has been interesting.
Mhm.
And
Yes.
TJ, what are your thoughts? Because you have the
Well, I do have the opposite. I guess one thing I'm curious about is at your time of diagnosis and how you were seeing, where was your brother in his journey at that point? Like, was he way worse than you? Was he kind of the same? Was it,
Yeah, he was about the same where he is now. So he was very much I'm trying to remember his acuity, somewhere in the 220 range. And
gotcha.
it's been pretty stationary since then.
Gotcha. I almost felt like, I don't know if you can relate to this, but each time I go, and I don't know if you know this or not, everyone else probably does, but I'm in a clinical trial where I go every 8 weeks to get an injection in my worst eye, which is my right eye. So I'm opposite of you guys. My right eye was very much my worst eye. I kind of thought it might have been my better eye, but the testing indicated otherwise. So they decided to treat that eye every time I go and I have a bunch of these tests done, the peripheral vision test, and it's not your standard where you sit there and just click the button. Like there's all kinds of things that they do more advanced than I had ever had at a regular visit before. And when I leave there, I almost feel like I've lost even more vision because all of the lights, the flashing lights, and all of the things, the eye strain that you're under, and that sort of stuff. It's almost like it makes me worse afterwards. So I'm like, right after diagnosis, I went through all of these tests to pinpoint exactly what I had and for people to confirm it. And I was like, I was seeing pretty good until I saw all of you, and now I can't see. It seems like it progressed kind of quickly. Do you feel like that happened with you?
I definitely had a little bit of that going through all those different testing, and it's a whole day ordeal.
It is. It is. And I'm like, gosh, I thought you were going to, give me a little better outcome than leaving me here worse than when I came in the door. But it seemed like it almost made it progress even faster in some way. And I hate to say that out loud, because everybody thinks I'm crazy, but I really think that that happens when you go in for all of those things. And so my vision, I only have anywhere from 8 to 10 degrees central vision left. So my peripheral is all the way narrow. So I'm like, I'll use Mandy, and I have said this plenty of times before, where I feel like I look through a straw. So I do constantly scanning and looking. So my central vision is what's intact, but it's a small amount. I mean, I get by day to day and still continue to do, but it's very limited amount. And if you ask me though, people ask me like, what do you see or how do you see that? And I'm like, well, I think I see fine. Like, I think I see everything. Why? Do you see more than I do? So yeah,
And
I totally get it.
Delaney, like, I saw that you used to do volleyball and you're on the varsity team. You were very active, obviously.
Yep.
How did the loss of vision impact those things from a social aspect in high school?
Well, it was one of the probably the biggest transitions because I was a multi-sport athlete. I had numerous different friends, whether it's, volleyball or soccer or everything I did.
Yeah,
And volleyball, like you said, was the biggest transition because I was a setter starting on the varsity team, and then it slowly decreased to JV, and then was getting benched.
yeah,
And my vision was obviously not 20/20 anymore, but it could have been easily assisted maybe with a multicolored ball or changing the
yeah,
lighting a little bit. And that was not being accommodated as well as I'd like it to. And there was only a select few individuals in my life who was willing to put in that a couple more minutes of effort to assist me to be more social or more active and things like that. So the transition socially was difficult and still is difficult to this day. Because of
Yeah.
course it's hard to explain to others and find a way for them to interpret what's going on. And so yeah, I'm still working through that stuff.
yeah. Definitely the same sort of thing happened to me. Although I had limited sight to start with, I grew up just playing rugby and basketball in the street with friends, and always did sport. And I played for my high school for rugby and basketball, and I was quite tall as a 15-year-old, so basketball was an easy sport for me to play. But then I had cataracts develop when I was 12, and I lost a lot of vision when I was 15. And so, I had to change completely and try some blind low vision sports. And I didn't even know blind and low vision sports existed, until I'd lost the vision. And things happen, I think, and I was interested, I saw you play golf in one of um, your
Yes.
things. You did reasonably well for someone with no central vision.
That's awesome.
So you have to check out Delaney's golf game. It's still got some good parts to it, I think. But I've been at Delaney to play blind low vision tennis a lot lately, and so I hope that she tries tennis soon. But I think, how do you feel about that transition of sport? I think when you're an athlete at that level, you kind of have a little bit of white line fever, right? So it's hard to just do things to enjoy it when you've played at a level for so long. And I wonder about people who have lost vision and are still young and active to be able to do different things. Like, have you tried any adaptive sports? Have you tried goalball as an example, or any other blind sports?
So in my earlier days, what I would typically do is just kind of transition out of that sport, kind of for almost my safety at that point. And recently getting on TikTok and social media, learning a little bit more about low vision sports, it's something that I was never taught about, or no one really expressed that to me. And so my being my age and still being young and active, it's definitely something I am wanting to pursue in my future.
Yeah.
But to kind of go back to you talking about my golf videos and things like that, I'm lucky enough to have a supportive family that assists me with golfing, but specifically going into bowling as well. That was the best experience I think I have had because I started in college or I started in high school when I still had vision, and so the transition was surprisingly easy. And then I was able to not only play in college, but I did it for my master's program. I had one more year of eligibility. So that was the best experience, uh, academic or athletically, I should say, when transitioning from vision loss.
Yeah, and so we're talking 10-pin bowling, is that right?
Yes.
Yeah. So do
Nice.
you want to tell TJ a little bit about your bowling career? Because I did see a
Yeah.
video on that
Yes.
and was interested in what you've actually done.
Yeah, so again, started in high school, but it was around junior year when I lost my vision. So I really experienced full vision loss at what I am right now, my senior year, and I was captain and I still ran a lot of the lineups and I was on the starting team and I figured out a little bit my senior year, but mostly during my undergrad years, how to I guess, transition how I'm going to practice and how I really view the game of bowling. And of course, you have your specific form and the lane play. And for me, I really just focus on my form and I try to perfect that because a lot of times, or every single time I'm at a bowling alley, there are arrows on the lane and the pins, down the lane. I am unable to see those and unable
Right.
to be as accurate as I'd like to be at some points. But if I really focus on my form, making sure I'm walking straight, my arm is straight, my timing is perfect, really trying to perfect that allowed me to not only play in college, but be on the starting team and be on varsity for both of the schools that I played in. And I have such amazing coaches and I have a lot of players who really assist me with that. They tell me, "Hey, these are the pins that are that are still up." And I've kind of mapped out specifically, okay, if I leave this pin, I'm going to use this ball and stand right here. And that's just something I've memorized, you can
Right.
say. And yeah, so it's really just perfection on my form. And I've also actually helped coach a little bit too, especially with the form of it all. And so I've helped a lot of different bowlers work on, hey, making sure our timing is right and making sure we're walking straight and let's position our hand here. And a lot of times I would take videos of not only myself, but people I'm working with, and I can zoom it in on myself and figure out, okay, that's a little off. Let's see if I can fix this.
Right. And I totally, it's so funny that you said that. We talked last week about I think in the week before about how we memorize. We're just so accustomed to, and it
Yes.
comes second nature. Like we just don't even give it a second thought. All we do is memorize. And I made the comment that anything that's moved in my house, if I don't know it, I'm gonna run into it, and don't move furniture without me knowing, for one thing, that's for sure. But it's our lives are based on memorization. And so I'm the mom of an athlete. My daughter played travel softball. She also played high school softball and then went on to play at the collegiate level. And watching her, so she is a left-handed pitcher, and there would be times that her coach, to get her form right, would blindfold her to throw to the catcher because it's relying on your form, your release point, all of those things, not just what you can see. And I think a lot of people don't, they fail to realize how important it is to rely on those things instead of just your vision. And so they question and they're like, well, how can you do this? Aren't you blind? And that's just like I shoot a bow and arrow, a compound bow and arrow, and I'm pretty good at it. And people question, they're like, how in the world can you do that when you're blind? And I'm like, well, if as long my form is right and I know exactly where my arms should be, if I'm out of form, my arrow isn't going to go where I want it to go. And if I can pick up where I need it to go and my form is right, then I will hit the target. So I think there's not enough said about that aspect of it. And maybe every sport should blindfold their athletes so that they can make sure from the beginning that they're doing their form correctly, you know?
Well,
I
So,
that's
just
yeah,
funny you say that because I've actually had some of my teammates close their eyes to going up to the to go bowl, and
see,
there it's a whole new perspective, and
it
they're
is.
amazed at how it works.
Yeah.
I think from a coaching point of view too, right? I used to take a lot of coaching students in Australia, and we'd have national goalball training at the Australian Institute of Sport, and they would get a lot out of it because typically you're using a lot of body language as a coach, where if you have to rely on just your verbiage and being really precise with what you're telling your players, coaches aren't used to doing that and used to being audible communicators as much.
Hmm.
And so my coach has always got a lot out of coming to global practice because you have a very limited time to talk to players. It is about minor corrections to do things better. And so your communication style has to be really on point. And so I think, both from a muscle memory and form type situation to a communication situation,
Hmm.
working in blind and low vision sports has a lot of advantages, I think. And I talk to orientation mobility instructors all the time about kids at a younger age, and I'm sure both of you will appreciate this being in healthcare, moving across a tennis court or a goalball court at a young age for spatial awareness perspective and obviously balance, coordination, motor skills, all those things. So I'm a huge believer in young kids with blindness, low vision playing sport at an early age so that they can develop those skills. And you see a massive difference in someone who has done that and taken the time to put their child into kinder gym as an example and tumble and just move as opposed to not doing those things when they get into school.
Exactly. Exactly. Very important.
So tell us about choosing your career and choosing OT as a pathway. What led up to that?
Yeah, so I honestly did not know what occupational therapy was for a pretty long time. When I started at Augustana College, I decided to get a major in kinesiology, mainly because I loved physical activity. I think anatomy is really cool and physiology and all that stuff. And so then further down the line, being a senior, I was kind of learning about, okay, what kind of stuff could I do? And throughout my undergrad, I added in a psychology minor. I added in that art minor. All these different creative things that might not seem like they go together, but to me, they go together perfectly. There's so many
Hmm.
aspects to all those things. And so that's when I learned a little bit about occupational therapy, but I learned it a little bit too late. And so that's when I found the master's in exercise physiology. There was a really cool program where it was the 4-1 program where I do 4 years undergrad and then a 1 year accelerated program at St. Ambrose University. And so the transition to that was a lot easier. Plus, it was something I was already passionate about. I learned a lot more about all that. But while I was at St. Ambrose, the administrative assistant at my master's program introduced me to the administrative assistant at the occupational therapy program. And she was amazed by my story and knew that someone like myself, with not only my academic background, but my personal experience, will not only just illuminate the OT field, but also would help strengthen their program and getting my perspective through it all. They just knew that my passion for all these features could really come together nicely. And so that's when I finally got accepted into the OT program. And it is one of the best experiences I think I've ever had. I've learned so much, and it's only been 1 year.
Great. I think that's important that you find your pathway. And I do a lot of coaching with youth, and a lot of kids don't know what they want to do, and I think that's great. You know, I didn't know really what I wanted to do until I was after 30 and chose a career. But you have your passion, right? And you always loved sport, obviously, physical activity, and so exercise physiology was right in that wheelhouse. And then the pivot to occupational therapy, I think, is a natural progression. Either physical therapy, which I saw that your brother is in. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah. So it's really interesting, that you've both kind of taken that pathway, and it's so valuable. I have a sister-in-law that is an OT, and she does 0 to 4, and she works for the state agency, and works with so many kids with disabilities to get them moving at a young age, and how important that is. And so, the work that you guys do in those spaces is just amazing and makes such a difference to families and obviously the younger participants. Do you have a specialist field that you're looking to get into from a work perspective?
Yeah, so joining OT, I knew wanted to do something with older adults
Yep.
in that population, but one of the professors there actually introduced me to the specialty of low vision rehabilitation.
Yep.
And so this is something I did not know occupational therapy does, but it is something that I think not only could help with what my passion for working with the older adult population, but there's such a wide variety, and like you were saying with the younger generation and getting them moving, getting them involved. I wish I had that experience of an OT who specializes in low vision rehab to get myself back into that athletic mindset and just be more independent in that way. So it's something that I'm going to definitely try to pursue with that. I'm also working on getting my capstone started. We're still in the very, very early stages, but I definitely want to do something with low vision rehabilitation. There's, again, so many pathways with that, whether it's just overall independence, mental health, adaptive equipment, and maybe a little bit something that I'm also looking into is the interdisciplinary collaboration with optometry as well.
Right. Yeah, there's so many really good, uh, I guess, parallels in what you're doing, and I think it's great. I'm actually in August. I've scheduled a meeting with the director of the state agency in Iowa, and so I might be able to put in a good word for you. I'm looking to develop some programs there in Iowa, just through my relationship with Elizabeth Rouse, who's on the board of NFB Acting and Arts. And Elizabeth is very close with the NFB convention there, and holds that in Iowa as well. So I think, there's some great niches in what you're doing. And obviously, the collaboration piece, I think, from a networking perspective is so important. TJ was kind of she lives regionally, right, TJ? And then you've been out of the scope of blindness and low vision, not really being part of that community until TikTok. And so there's so many rural and regional communities that I think can really benefit from, people like yourself, Delaney, who are in those niche fields that help people so much.
Exactly. It's very much a need. I'm looking forward to seeing what you do. I'll definitely have to continue to follow along. And I think you getting on into the low vision aspect of it is amazing. There's not enough of that in healthcare. And I think that, like when I go to my eye doctors, there's not many. I think my eye doctor, my regular optometrist, only has 2 retinitis pigmentosa patients. My retina specialist, I think at once he said maybe he had 4. So I think that across the board, there's definitely, I feel like, more Stargardts. The prevalence of that is much higher than retinitis pigmentosa, or so it seems. And I love that there are people going into the fields that can help others navigate their healthcare when they are experiencing the same thing that we've gone through, because we may have been further along in our journey and learned things outside of just what we know in healthcare, as far as what we've learned from our vision impaired community, our resources that we've been able to get a hold to. I just find it very beneficial for people to know what's available and what's out there. So kudos to you. That's amazing.
Thank you.
And I think that leads us really nicely into our next topic, which is advocacy. I've been really pleased and proud of you for the way that you've gone about advocating not only for yourself, but advocating for blindness and low vision in the aspects where you've been able to. Tell us about how that came about, and tell us about, in going through your high school journey and separation from friends and peers because of the diagnosis, how you decided to approach advocacy on the whole, moving into your career and into your study.
Yeah, so it started a little bit more with my undergrad, as there was not a good disability services there. And so I really just individually had to advocate for myself to get the proper accommodations just in that school setting. And then with the increase in social media, specifically with TikTok, of course, that was something that I thought, how can I incorporate this into my life? And so ultimately, I just really wanted to document my journey in occupational therapy and really just kind of put that niche out there of that blind OT student. And so it really just started as just a way for me to, I guess, document my journey through it all, not realizing it was going to be bigger than I could ever imagine. There are so many connections that I've already built. There's so many people that are super interested and didn't know that I did this or you could do this or, all those little things. And so it was really just a individualistic kind of approach to kind of help with myself, a little bit with my brother as well, assist with that, and then taking it onto TikTok. Never thought it would turn out the way it is now, and I'm excited for the opportunities. And even myself, I'm learning so many new things. I'm getting introduced to so many amazing people, and I'm actually experiencing a lot of people with Stargardt's as well, and hearing their stories and learning new things that I could do. And like it was just an out of a whim thing I did, and it was the best experience that I could have done for myself.
The question obviously has to be, how do you like being a Star Guardian?
While I am looking for a cure, I do not regret experiencing this and having this happen to me. I've definitely learned and kind of understood the perspectives of so many different things, and I wouldn't change my experience for the world.
One thing that I love about your story, and obviously just getting to talk to you, you can sense this very clearly, is that you are very determined. And because your vision changed, you didn't change. And I really appreciate that about you, because that's one thing that I preach a lot about, is just having faith that you can still be the person that you've always been, and that you don't need to change who you are because your vision's changed. And I think you're a perfect example of that. So it's challenging and it's very difficult to be that continued person. But, you clearly have, very strong intelligence. You have good personality traits. You're very personable. And, a lot of things that I think you were who you were, and you still are that person. So that's a big achievement to go through, especially at a young age, with the diagnosis and the vision loss that you've had. So you should be very proud of what you've been able to achieve.
Thank you so much. That means the world.
Yeah. It's really important, I think, to drive home that point that you don't change. You don't have to change as a person. We adapt and we find new ways to do things, but we really, strongly want people to be who they are as a person, and not let their vision define everything about them. And I think that's really important. And we've talked about that constantly, right, TJ, on this podcast.
Yes, yes, we have. Yes, we have. It baffles me that people automatically assume because we don't see well that we don't do anything else well. And it's always a reference when I know you've probably had it happen. I've had it happen when you mention that you have low vision, they automatically start speaking louder to you. And I'm like, I can hear you, and things like that. So the perception, I think, of the people in the vision impaired community from the outside world, us changing that is so very important, and letting them know that even though we might not see as well as they do, we can still do everything that they do. I say all the time, the only thing that others can't do that I can do is, for one, drive at night because I have zero night vision, and I am limited as far as where I drive. I do live in a small town, so I only drive around here. Anything else in high traffic areas and that sort of thing is not, doesn't happen. But it's wild because in my state, there is no limit on your peripheral vision. As long as you can see the eye chart to take the test, you can keep your vision. I mean, your driver's license. So that's wild to me. But I think that comes down to an ethical thing where you understand when it is no longer safe to do so, and they kind of leave it up to you to do that. But I think it's very important that your stories are out there and that you show people this doesn't define you. It's a part of who you are, but it does not define you. So thank you for doing that.
Delaney, what's been the biggest challenge to advocate effectively for yourself that you've found so far?
Oh man. I would probably have to say it's something relating to the social aspect. There's a lot of social constraints and trying to identify how to approach different situations and kind of going back to the whole driving thing. I have not driven since junior year of high school and trying to, I guess, ask for others, ask for support, ask for understanding. That is more difficult than one may think. There are so many amazing people in the world, but trying to find that understanding, and it's hard for me to kind of allude to that
Yeah,
kind of notion of, well, this is the way it is, and this is kind of
right.
what it needs to be done. And it's, there are times where I might get screwed over or
Yeah,
in
100%.
the
Right.
social
Uh,
thing.
Not to stereotype Iowa, but I wouldn't imagine there's a robust transportation system for mass transit in Iowa. And that's, one challenge that I found Australia versus America. We have quite a good train system where I was in Sydney, where you can just jump on the train and pretty much get anywhere that you want within walking distance or public transport, light rail, and so forth. But in smaller states where there isn't that infrastructure, I just saw a video of, I think her name was Annie, and I reposted the video where she's talking about Star Guards, and she brings up a photo of Tom Cruise, and she's like, "This is how it was described to me." It's kind of a cool thing, but she said that she moved. She's 30, and she had to move to an area with mass transit. She moved to Washington D.C. to work because there was the ability to be very independent around transport and work and so forth. What kind of things are you most concerned about, moving forward?
Yeah, so kind of to talk about that, yeah, I really just have to work on carpooling.
Yeah,
We don't have a drain system here, and we have the bus system, but still kind of, even though I'm well known in the low vision community, there's still a lot that I need to learn, and there's still some things I'm scared about. And one of those is that public transport. And so, luckily, at the time, I have a loving boyfriend who is completely okay to chauffeur me around at any time,
that's good.
and
My wife is
and
the same. I said to my wife, do you ever think about losing your vision? We were on a long drive down to a conference, and she's like, actually, yeah, I do think about that often and what would happen. I said, well, I think we'd have to move because
It's
I mean,
same here. We just
and we're so far away from anything. There's
we
buses
just
nowhere near us.
we just went through that actually here, and it was an eye-opening experience, that's for sure, for no pun intended, but because my husband lost vision in his left eye due to a stroke, so it was very scary to think about, you know and everybody was jokingly saying, you guys are the blind leading the blind over there, and I'm like, yeah, we are, but you don't know how that
Right.
makes us
How
feel.
stressful. Yeah. When
It's
you're in a regional area with maybe not being able to drive, it's certainly a determination. And, I saw that your video around your grandmother and walking in with your grandmother having a stroke, and I thought of our situation. I had a minor stroke in 2022, and was lucky enough to get to the hospital and realize I was in that process. And then obviously TJ's husband most recently, but I think that touches you a little bit, doesn't it? It changes you and
Yes, very
changes your
much.
perspective about what's real and what's not, and how things like that shaped you as well.
Well, I'd like to say my grandma, she's lived across the street from me ever since I was 4 years old, and she was the one to drive me when I was too young to drive and drive me when I couldn't drive anymore. And seeing her loss of independence, kind of losing the ability of her left side, um, it's it's very, like you said, eye-opening to experience that. And she was someone that I used as a resource and relied on, and she is my best friend. I couldn't ask for a better grandma,
Yeah,
and yeah, it's kind of something that we talked about a little bit, me and her. We kind of bond over the
yeah,
loss of independence in certain aspects, and it's very different since, I'm 24 and she's 88.
yep. Bit of
But
a
we
difference.
were able to bond a little bit more with all that, and it's something that, you know, sometimes there's really not much solutions out there, and we just have to rely on others for support and
Yeah.
try to get through it day by day and have an open mind with it all.
Yeah, well, it's like
exactly.
you found some of those things, which is great. We're really happy to hear that. We're really excited about your journey, Delaney. Honestly, I think you are going to be a breath of fresh air in the community, and just your life experience at 24 has been immense, and you've handled yourself extremely well. And so, congratulations on that. Are there any kind of last things you'd like to talk about on this platform?
Oh, wow. Well, I with my TikTok, not only do I spread awareness of blind and low vision, but I just want to spread positivity and knowing that everybody lives their own life, and trying to kind of take a step back and learn the perspectives of others. It's really going to be able to have you experience something that you haven't experienced before. I mean, being being more open myself through TikTok. I cannot thank I cannot thank this TikTok and you guys, and it's just, I'm so grateful and appreciative that I'm able to experience this and really just dive deeper into the everybody's life. And no one lives, there's a lot of people with Stargardts and other low vision problems, but being able to not only find similarities, but find those differences. The amount that I've learned and grown within this last year. And I'm so excited to take that into occupational therapy and low vision rehab and just grow as life continues on, and continue with that open mindset, and just see where it all takes me.
Well, I'm very excited to get you to try blind low vision tennis,
Yes.
and get you into some adaptive sports, because I think that that you would be very, very successful at. And so it's always nice. I've travelled around the world playing sport, goalball as a player for Australia and a coach for Australia, and just such wonderful memories. So I think that there's a lot ahead for you as well. You're only just starting out, so I'm really,
Yes.
really enjoy seeing your journey. TJ, any last thoughts?
Yes. No, I'm gonna just piggyback on what Delaney was saying as far as the community of people surrounding yourself with others. I never feel like I'm alone, and I did feel that way for a very long time. There's no one else around me that I personally connected with low vision. Absolutely no one with retinitis pigmentosa. So I agree. Sharing my journey was probably it was the largest hill that I had to climb for myself, but once I did it, I have no regrets, and I'm so thankful for everyone that I've met on this journey. And I urge everyone to just share it. We support you. We support one another. Um, it's very liberating, and I'm thankful.
And we all got the dress memo today. Delaney's in blue, you're in white, and I'm in blue and white. So
Yeah,
we're all matchy matchy. Good job.
we are. That's right.
Well, Delaney, thank you so much for sharing a little bit of your journey and some of yourself with us. We greatly
Yes.
appreciate it. I'm sure our community will love you and follow you, and we'll definitely look forward to more conversations. But thank you so much. We really appreciate the time.
Thank you so much for this opportunity.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.